The argument erupted unexpectedly on a quiet Sunday evening. We had just finished dinner when she brought up an offhand remark about my lack of ambition. At first, it seemed like a casual complaint, the kind couples exchange without much weight. I didn't take it seriously, but her tone soon shifted. Her words became sharper, more personal. She began comparing me to her friends' husbands, listing their successful careers, financial stability, and the comfortable lives they had built for their families. In contrast, she painted me as a failure. Calmly, I asked her why she was saying all this out of nowhere. She hesitated, as if making a calculated decision, then looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I married you out of pity. I never really loved you." The air in the room grew unbearably heavy. Her words settled between us like a weight too immense to lift. Struggling to keep my voice steady, I asked her to explain what she meant. She responded coldly, saying that when we first met, she saw me as lost, lacking direction. She believed she could fix me, shape me into something better. But over the years, I had remained stagnant, unambitious, content with mediocrity. Her voice dripped with resentment as she recounted every perceived shortcoming, every moment of disappointment. She described how my lack of drive had embarrassed her in front of friends and family. She even referenced a comment she had overheard at a gathering. Someone had joked that I was holding her back. I hadn't even known she heard it, let alone stored it away as ammunition for this moment. I listened in silence, realizing this wasn't a spontaneous outburst. She had rehearsed this, chosen each word with precision, ensuring every criticism cut deep. What stunned me most wasn't just the cruelty but the cold detachment with which she spoke. She had spent years pretending, hiding her dissatisfaction beneath forced smiles and routine affection. For a moment, I considered arguing, demanding answers, trying to reason with her. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. She had already rewritten our history, reducing it to an obligation she had endured rather than a partnership she had cherished. My presence had become intolerable to her. Instead of reacting emotionally, I resolved to seek clarity. I needed to understand the truth, not just the surface-level resentment she had revealed, but the deeper reality of our marriage. The next morning, I quietly began observing her behavior. I didn't confront her. I didn't argue. Instead, I decided to gather evidence, to make sense of the shocking confession she had dropped so casually. My first step was simple. I examined our joint bank statements and bills, something I had always trusted her to manage. What I found was alarming. There were consistent withdrawals and payments to places I didn't recognize. The amounts weren't large enough to immediately stand out, but collectively, they suggested she had been keeping secrets from me. Next, I reached out to mutual friends and acquaintances, careful with my words so as not to raise suspicion. One friend mentioned something that caught my attention. She had seen my wife meeting someone at a cafe near her workplace multiple times. At the time, she assumed it was a coworker. But now, with everything I knew, it felt suspicious. Determined to uncover the truth, I did something I never thought I would. I followed her after work. Sitting in my car from a safe distance, I watched as she arrived at the very cafe my friend had described. Minutes later, a man I had never seen before joined her. Their interaction was intimate, not overtly romantic, but comfortable, familiar. They spoke for nearly an hour before she left, completely unaware of my presence. That night, I waited until she had gone to bed before going through her phone. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Countless messages between her and the man from the cafe. Conversations filled with personal details, emotional support, and discussions she had never shared with me. Though not explicitly romantic, their connection was undeniable. Even worse, in some messages, she openly lamented feeling trapped in a marriage that offered her little more than financial security. She spoke about wanting more, about needing an escape. And then, I found something even more damning. Messages with another friend, discussing plans to leave. She had been preparing for a future without me, deliberately excluding me from her life decisions. By the end of that night, I realized just how profoundly I had misunderstood the woman I had married. The love I thought we shared had been a facade. She had been harboring resentment, constructing an exit plan, and deceiving me for years. And now, armed with the truth, I knew I had to decide what came next. She wasn't just unhappy. She was meticulously orchestrating a double life while maintaining the illusion of normalcy at home. Every revelation pointed to calculated deception rather than mere dissatisfaction. For years, I had lived with someone who manipulated circumstances and people with precision, ensuring her plans remained hidden. The more I uncovered, the clearer her betrayal became. My wife hadn't simply drifted away. She had deliberately constructed an alternate reality behind my back. The next day, while she was out, I took the opportunity to dig deeper. Searching through her personal belongings, I discovered a small drawer in her dresser, hidden beneath neatly folded clothes. Inside, I found meticulously organized paperwork, documents that detailed plans she had made without my knowledge. There were real estate brochures and property listings for apartments far from our neighborhood, marked with annotations highlighting potential new homes. Notes on their proximity to her workplace and estimated moving costs painted a clear picture. She was planning an entirely new life without me. Then, I found something even more damning. Printouts from legal websites outlined strategies to secure the most favorable financial outcome in a divorce. These weren't casual searches. The pages were covered in handwritten notes, detailing ways to manipulate assets and ensure she walked away with the greatest advantage. My hands clenched as I sifted through the evidence. A receipt from a lawyer's office, dated weeks before our last argument, confirmed my worst fears. The same day she claimed she was working late, she had been secretly seeking legal counsel. Everything she had done, every casual question about our finances, every seemingly innocent discussion about retirement accounts, had been part of her careful strategy. She had been laying the groundwork, preparing to strike when the time was right. I knew I couldn't ignore this. That evening, I discreetly reached out to a trusted attorney friend, sharing the evidence I had uncovered. His response was immediate and chilling. She was positioning herself to portray me negatively, ensuring she had the upper hand when the divorce proceedings began. Following his advice, I documented everything. I took photos of the notes, bank statements, legal consultations, every shred of proof. The sheer scale of her deception was staggering. This wasn't a moment of emotional turmoil or spontaneous decision-making. This was cold, calculated betrayal. By the time I put everything back exactly as I found it, my path forward was clear. If she had been preparing for months, then so would I. For days, I worked in silence, carefully assembling my own strategy with my lawyer. I remained calm at home, acting as if nothing had changed, even as I plotted the moment she would face the truth. I knew the perfect setting, our annual gathering, where friends, family, and her colleagues would be present. A night she cherished because it reinforced the image she had carefully built, the devoted wife, the perfect spouse. That night, her facade would shatter. On the evening of the event, I played my role flawlessly. I greeted guests, made small talk, and watched as she moved through the room, charming everyone, oblivious to what was coming. As the night progressed, I seized my moment. Standing in the center of the living room, I gently asked for everyone's attention. A hush fell over the crowd. Expecting a light-hearted toast, they turned to me with smiles. But my words carried none of the warmth they anticipated. Methodically, I laid out the facts. I detailed the secret meetings at the cafe, providing dates, times, and locations. I watched as confusion flickered across her face before morphing into panic. Then, I revealed the financial documents, the subtle withdrawals, the hidden accounts, the carefully orchestrated plans to leave me in the weakest financial position possible. Her carefully crafted image began to crumble. I described how she had secretly met with an attorney long before ever expressing unhappiness in our marriage, how she had mapped out an entire exit strategy while pretending everything was fine. The room shifted. Disbelief replaced polite smiles. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others openly gaped at the sheer audacity of her deception. And then, for the final blow, I presented the physical evidence. Printouts of her meticulously annotated divorce plans. Each note, each strategy, each calculation laid bare for all to see. There was no room for denial. No way to spin the truth. She wasn't just exposed, she was dismantled. In the very space where she had built her false reputation, she now stood, utterly undone. And I was already one step ahead, ready to ensure she faced the full consequences of her betrayal. She attempted to interrupt me, stammering excuses and weak explanations, desperately trying to reclaim control of the narrative. But her feeble attempts only made her look guiltier. especially when she couldn't deny the documents I presented. I watched carefully as shock and disbelief registered on the faces of those around us. They weren't just upset, they felt deeply betrayed. For years, they had trusted the image she had so carefully crafted, only to see it crumble before their eyes. As my revelation unfolded, the atmosphere in the room grew tense, awkward, and heavy. Whispered conversations rippled through the crowd, guests exchanging uneasy glances. My wife stood frozen, her eyes wide with humiliation. She tried to defend herself, stumbling through flimsy excuses, claiming I had misunderstood her intentions or taken things out of context. But the evidence I provided left little room for doubt, and even her closest friends saw through her hollow justifications. One by one, our guests began questioning her. My sister confronted her outright, demanding to know how long she had planned this betrayal. My wife's face flushed as she scrambled for words, eventually admitting that she had been considering divorce for a long time. Yet, she still desperately framed her actions as self-preservation rather than deception. Each question forced her deeper into her lies, exposing how much she had concealed and manipulated. The mood shifted dramatically. Friends and family who had once admired her turned their backs, some shaking their heads in silent disappointment, others openly voicing their disgust. A few couples, once our closest friends, gathered their things and left, unwilling to linger in the toxic atmosphere. Realizing she had lost control completely, she resorted to a new tactic, seeking sympathy. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she had been unhappy, lonely, and unfulfilled for years. She insisted she had sacrificed her happiness and ambitions by staying married to someone who lacked ambition. But her manipulative pleas found no traction. No one was fooled. Instead, those present voiced their disappointment, not just in her betrayal of me, but in how she had deceived them as well. In desperation, she turned to her family, hoping they would offer her comfort and support. But her parents, who had always respected me, expressed nothing but disbelief and sadness. Her own brother confronted her harshly, demanding to know why she had manipulated someone she once claimed to care about. Her attempts to garner compassion failed, leaving her completely isolated. She was no longer the admired woman who had spent years crafting a perfect image. Instead, she stood exposed as someone who had betrayed trust and destroyed relationships. Through it all, I remained silent, observing as she unraveled before everyone. When the last of our guests had left, she sat alone in the now empty living room, staring blankly ahead. No longer did she try to deny or justify herself. Instead, she quietly began packing some of her belongings. I watched from a distance as she finally understood. Sympathy would not come easily. She had lost everything in a single evening. As she packed, she made one last attempt to appeal to me directly, awkwardly apologizing and insisting she had never intended things to unfold this way. But I offered no sympathy, no comfort, only silence. I now saw her for who she truly was, and any remorse she displayed was purely because she had been exposed. Without another word, I turned away, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. In the days following the confrontation, I moved quickly to finalize the legal aspects of our separation. My attorney ensured everything was handled swiftly and thoroughly. We froze our joint accounts, canceled credit cards, and secured documentation proving her financial manipulations. I was advised to maintain minimal communication, avoiding any direct conflict to prevent her from twisting my words or actions against me. She soon realized her manipulations and pleas for sympathy were futile. Her messages became increasingly desperate, texts asking for forgiveness, emails pleading for understanding, voice messages begging me to reconsider. My responses remained cold, practical, and limited strictly to legal necessities. Every interaction was short, factual, and devoid of emotion, exactly as my attorney had instructed. Her desperation escalated. One moment, she pleaded for reconciliation. The next, she accused me of deliberately humiliating her. When emotional appeals failed, she turned to mutual friends, hoping they would mediate. But by then, our circle had seen her true nature, and most had distanced themselves. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. I methodically removed any remnants of our shared past, rearranging furniture, replacing items she had chosen, erasing any lingering trace of her presence. My goal was simple, a clean start, free from nostalgic attachments. As weeks passed, I heard about her struggles through mutual acquaintances. Financially, she had underestimated how difficult independence would be without the stability she had once taken for granted. Her carefully crafted plans had disintegrated, leaving her dependent on the charity of others, friends and family who had, for the most part, turned their backs on her. She tried to regain sympathy, spinning exaggerated tales of our breakup, but her words rang hollow. Those who had witnessed the truth firsthand no longer trusted her. Her social circle shrank drastically, her reputation permanently tarnished. Even her professional relationships suffered as quiet whispers of her deceit spread. Her world unraveled rapidly, leaving her in the very position she had once falsely accused me of being in, desperate and alone. I, however, remained distant. Occasionally, I would receive updates on her declining situation, but I chose not to respond or engage. My decision to remain detached was deliberate. I refused to give her any ammunition to use against me, legally or emotionally. Once all legal matters were settled, I moved forward with confidence, feeling fully vindicated and free. Without hesitation or regret, I embraced a new chapter of my life, clear-minded and determined. Ironically, her attempts to seek sympathy had left her in the exact situation she had once tried to paint me into, dependent entirely on the mercy of others, with no one left to save her.